I walked out of that place without looking back. The air felt heavy, but my steps were steady. People were still behind me, whispering, guessing, waiting for me to fall apart. I didn't give them that. I got into my car, closed the door, and sat there for a long time without turning the key. My hands were calm, but my chest felt tight, like something important had finally shut down. On the drive home, memories kept coming without warning. Not the good ones, just the moments I ignored. Times Ethan brushed off my questions. Times I told myself I was overthinking. I used to believe trust meant staying quiet when something felt wrong. That night, I understood how wrong I had been. At home, everything looked the same. The couch, the photos, the neat kitchen I cleaned every weekend. It all felt borrowed now, like I was standing in someone else's life. I poured a glass of water and sat at the table. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt clear. Painful, but clear. I thought about who I was before the marriage. I had dreams I paused, plans I delayed, confidence I slowly handed over without noticing. I realized I had been living carefully, making sure Ethan was comfortable, respected, admired. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking for the same. That night, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not beg for honesty. I would not compete for loyalty. And I would not explain my worth to anyone who chose to forget it. Whatever came next, I would face it with my eyes open. Ethan didn't come home until late. I heard his keys, his familiar footsteps. I stayed where I was. When he saw me, he hesitated, like he expected tears or anger. I gave him neither. I asked nothing. I said nothing. That seemed to unsettle him more than any argument ever had. When he went to bed, I stayed up. I opened my laptop and began looking through things I had never questioned before, documents, emails, dates. Not with panic, but with focus. I wasn't hunting for drama. I was preparing for truth. As the hours passed, fear tried to creep in. What if I couldn't do this? What if I ended up alone, judged, blamed? Then another thought followed, stronger than the rest. I was already alone. I had been for longer than I wanted to admit. By morning, I felt exhausted but grounded. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired, but there was something new there too, resolve. I wasn't smiling for anyone else anymore. I was smiling because I finally chose myself. Whatever Ethan thought he had taken from me, he was wrong. He had only revealed the truth. And that truth gave me the strength to walk forward without fear. For a long time I believed I was lucky. That's what everyone told me. They looked at my marriage and saw stability, teamwork, and love. Ethan was driven and charming. People trusted him easily, and I trusted him most of all. We talked about the future like it was a promise already signed. A bigger home. Children one day. Growing old without fear. I believed in those plans with my whole heart. I supported Ethan in every way I knew how. When his job demanded long hours, I adjusted my schedule. When opportunities came up for me, I stepped back so his path could stay clear. I told myself this was what partnership looked like. I was proud of him, and I wanted him to succeed. It never crossed my mind that loyalty could be one-sided. Our friends often joked that we were the perfect couple. Family members praised Ethan for being dependable and focused. I smiled through those moments, feeling a quiet sense of achievement. I thought love was proven by endurance. If something felt off, I blamed stress or work pressure. I chose understanding instead of questions. Still, there were changes I noticed but didn't name. Ethan became less present, even when he was physically there. Conversations felt shorter. His attention drifted. Some nights, he came home later than usual with simple explanations I didn't challenge. I didn't want to be the kind of wife who doubted without proof. I convinced myself that distance was normal, that marriage had seasons. I remembered how we started and believed we would return there again. I focused on keeping peace, on making home feel calm. I thought if I gave more patience, things would settle. Looking back, I see how often I ignored my own feelings. I felt lonely in small ways, but I pushed that aside. I reminded myself of our shared history and the life we built together. I trusted that commitment meant safety. I didn't realize how much I was giving up. My time. My voice. My chances. I thought sacrifice would be met with respect. I believed love was something you protected by staying quiet when things felt uncertain. What I didn't understand then was that trust without honesty slowly becomes blindness. I wasn't weak. I was hopeful. I believed in the marriage everyone admired. I believed in the man they praised. And I believed that choosing commitment over suspicion was the right thing to do. By the time I sensed something was truly wrong, I had already taught myself not to look too closely. Her name had come up many times before, always in casual ways. Lauren Pierce. Ethan mentioned her like she was nothing more than a coworker who happened to be around often. I accepted that without question. I never wanted to be suspicious of someone just because she was close to my husband at work. I trusted him, and I trusted that boundaries existed even when I couldn't see them. There were small moments I brushed aside. Ethan stepping into another room to take a call. His phone turning face down on the table. Sudden changes in plans that were explained with quick excuses. None of it felt strong enough to accuse him of anything. I told myself I was imagining patterns that weren't there. Lauren appeared in stories more often over time. Her name slipped out during dinner conversations, work complaints, and passing comments. I noticed how easily he spoke about her, how familiar she sounded in his voice. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't want to be the person who read meaning into harmless details. At home, things felt colder. Ethan was physically present but emotionally distant. He listened less. He asked fewer questions about my day. When I reached for him, he pulled back without explanation. I blamed exhaustion. I blamed pressure. I blamed everything except the truth. The realization came slowly, not like a storm, but like a heavy fog settling in. When I connected the dots, there was no shouting inside me. Just a deep, uncomfortable calm. I understood then that what was happening wasn't sudden or accidental. It had been building quietly while I chose not to see it. I thought about every time I defended him in my own mind. Every time I told myself love meant trust without proof. That understanding hurt more than anger ever could. It wasn't just about Lauren. It was about the space he allowed her to take while pushing me further away. What struck me most was how normal everything had seemed. There was no dramatic confession, no clear beginning. Just repeated choices made behind my back. Choices to lie by omission. Choices to protect another connection while neglecting his marriage. I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. A painful kind of clarity that left no room for excuses. I realized I had been faithful not only to him, but to an image of him that no longer existed. In that moment, I stopped asking why. I stopped searching for reasons. Some betrayals don't need explanation. They only need acknowledgement. And once I allowed myself to see the truth, I knew I could never unsee it again. The room felt different after that moment, like all the air had shifted. I could sense people looking at me, then quickly looking away. Whispers spread fast, low and sharp. No one knew what to do with me. They were waiting for tears, for anger, for something loud. I felt it clearly. Ethan expected me to break. Lauren expected drama. I gave them nothing. I stood still for a second, steadying myself. My face stayed calm, almost unreadable. I didn't rush. I didn't react. I simply turned and walked away. Each step felt heavy, but controlled. I held my posture, lifted my head, and moved through the room like I belonged to myself again. Behind me, I could feel the tension grow. Silence followed me instead of laughter. That silence felt powerful. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I wasn't trying to explain or protect anyone. I was just leaving. Outside, the night air felt cool against my skin. I took a deep breath, slow and full. My heart was beating fast, but my thoughts were clear. The shock had passed. What remained was understanding. There was no confusion left to wrestle with. At home later, the quiet felt loud. Every sound echoed. I moved through the room slowly, noticing details I had stopped seeing. The space didn't feel safe or warm anymore. It felt temporary. Like a place I was already preparing to leave. I sat down alone and let the truth settle without resistance. There was no denial left in me. No hope that things could return to what they were. That chapter had closed, whether I wanted it to or not. And for the first time, I didn't try to force it open again. I thought about what I deserved. Not promises. Not appearances. Just honesty and respect. I understood that staying would mean accepting less than that. Leaving would be painful, but staying would cost me more. I didn't feel weak. I felt firm. I wasn't angry enough to shout, and I wasn't broken enough to beg. I felt steady, like someone who had finally reached the end of a long argument with herself. That night, I didn't make dramatic plans. I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront Ethan. I simply accepted one clear truth: this marriage was finished. Not because of one moment, but because of everything it revealed. I went to bed knowing my life was about to change. The fear was there, but it didn't control me. What guided me instead was certainty. I would leave with dignity. I would leave with control. And I would not let anyone rewrite my silence as weakness. I fell asleep knowing that whatever came next, it would be on my terms. The next days passed quietly. From the outside, nothing looked different. I went to work, answered calls, and kept my tone normal. Inside, everything had shifted. I wasn't waiting for explanations anymore. I was preparing. I met with David Brooks on a quiet afternoon. He wasn't dramatic or overly friendly. He listened carefully and spoke with calm certainty. That helped me stay grounded. He didn't ask me how angry I was or how hurt I felt. He asked for facts. Dates. Records. Patterns. That was the moment I understood this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about truth. David explained the importance of patience. He told me that acting too fast could cost me later. I took that seriously. I didn't want chaos. I wanted fairness and closure. He showed me how preparation creates power, and how silence, when used correctly, protects you. I went home and began organizing everything. Bank statements. Property documents. Shared expenses. I didn't rush. I worked slowly, carefully, making sure nothing was missed. Each paper I reviewed made things clearer. This wasn't revenge fueled by anger. This was self-respect taking form. I resisted the urge to confront Ethan. Some part of me wanted answers, apologies, explanations. But I knew those conversations would only drain me. I didn't need his words anymore. I needed control over my future. Ethan noticed my distance but misunderstood it. He thought silence meant confusion. He didn't realize it meant resolve. I stayed calm, polite, and brief. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. That made him careless. He assumed I wasn't paying attention. Late at night, I created timelines. I compared changes in behavior with financial shifts. Everything began to line up. There was a strange sense of relief in seeing the full picture clearly. Painful, but clean. I learned something important during that time. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits quietly, gathering strength while others underestimate it. I didn't need to raise my voice or demand justice. I was building it piece by piece. There were moments when doubt tried to creep in. Moments when I wondered if I was being too cold, too distant, too calculated. Then I reminded myself why I was here. I wasn't doing this to hurt anyone. I was doing this to protect myself. By the time the paperwork was ready, I felt steady. Not numb. Not angry. Just prepared. I knew exactly what I wanted and what I would not accept. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. And that made all the difference. Ethan changed in ways that were easy to notice once I stopped making excuses for him. He walked around with a lightness he hadn't had in months. He stayed out longer and came home with stories that didn't add up. He spoke freely, as if the weight of responsibility had lifted from his shoulders. In his mind, the worst was over. He acted like my quiet behavior meant I had accepted things. He assumed I was confused, maybe scared, maybe still hoping he would choose me. That belief made him careless. He stopped hiding his attitude. He talked openly about feeling misunderstood and trapped. He painted himself as someone who had been patient for too long. When he spoke about our marriage, he changed the story. He hinted that we had grown apart naturally. That nothing had really gone wrong. That he had tried his best. I listened without reacting. I didn't correct him. I didn't argue. I let him talk. At home, I stayed polite. I answered when spoken to. I kept my distance without being cold. I didn't ask where he was going or who he was seeing. That seemed to confuse him. He expected questions. He expected emotion. My calm unsettled him more than anger ever could. Ethan began to believe he was in control again. He joked more. He made plans without checking in. He behaved like a man already free. Watching him, I learned more than I ever could from confrontation. People reveal the truth when they think no one is watching. Every careless word, every shift in behavior, added to the picture I was quietly building. I noticed how relaxed he became. How confident. How sure he was that nothing would touch him. That confidence made him sloppy. There were moments when he tested me, saying things meant to provoke a reaction. I didn't take the bait. I stayed neutral. Inside, I was alert. I understood that silence was no longer avoidance, it was observation. He underestimated me completely. He thought strength came from control and noise. He didn't see that restraint could be stronger. I wasn't waiting for him to choose. I had already chosen myself. As days passed, it became clear that Ethan believed he had won something. Freedom, relief, validation. He didn't realize that every step he took forward was leading him closer to a reality he wasn't prepared for. I watched, listened, and remembered. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. I wasn't collecting anger. I was collecting truth. And while Ethan enjoyed his sense of victory, I remained steady, knowing that his confidence was built on an assumption that would soon collapse. The morning felt ordinary, which made the moment stronger. Sunlight came through the kitchen window, landing on the same table we had shared for years. I made coffee like I always did. Ethan sat across from me, relaxed, distracted, confident. He had no idea what was coming. I placed the envelope on the table between us. I didn't slide it dramatically or say anything sharp. I simply set it down and folded my hands. He glanced at it, confused at first, then amused. He smiled and let out a short laugh, like it was a joke he didn't understand yet. "What's this?" he asked lightly. I told him it was important and waited. He opened it slowly, still wearing that careless expression. As his eyes moved across the page, the smile faded. His posture changed. The room grew quiet in a way that felt final. He looked up at me, searching my face for emotion. There was none he could use. No anger to argue with. No sadness to soften me. Just calm. He started to speak, then stopped. He tried again, this time with questions that came too late. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't explain myself. Everything he needed to know was already written in front of him. For the first time in a long while, Ethan wasn't in control of the situation. He realized I hadn't been waiting or hoping. I had been moving forward without him. That understanding hit him harder than the papers themselves. He asked if this was really happening. I nodded once. No speeches. No accusations. I told him the next steps were outlined clearly. That was all. The silence between us felt heavy, but I didn't rush to fill it. I stood up, rinsed my cup, and moved like my world hadn't just shifted. That unsettled him more than any raised voice could have. He tried to regain control, saying things about timing and misunderstandings. I listened without responding. Those words no longer had weight. They were echoes of conversations I was done having. When I left the kitchen, I felt something lift inside me. Not happiness. Relief. The kind that comes from finally telling the truth without fear. In that moment, everything changed. He understood that I wasn't reacting to his choices anymore. I was making my own. And there was nothing he could say or do to stop what had already been set in motion. The weeks that followed were slow and heavy. Everything moved through quiet rooms and formal conversations. Papers passed hands. Questions were asked carefully. There was no shouting, no public scenes. Just facts laid out one by one. Ethan tried to hold on to his version of the story. He spoke about confusion, about stress, about mistakes made on both sides. At first, some people listened. It was easier to believe things had simply fallen apart than to face what had really happened. Then the details began to surface. Financial records didn't match his claims. Timelines didn't line up with his explanations. Promises he said he had kept were shown clearly on paper as broken. Each document removed another layer of the story he had built. I stayed quiet through most of it. I answered questions when asked and nothing more. I didn't argue or defend myself emotionally. The truth didn't need help. It spoke for itself. Ethan grew frustrated as control slipped further from his grasp. The calm confidence he once had disappeared. He became defensive, repeating points that no longer held weight. The room shifted slowly, but clearly. People began to see what I had lived with for years. Patricia Morgan, his mother, was forced to face facts she had avoided. She had always believed in her son's image. Seeing the records shook that belief. She didn't apologize. She didn't comfort me. But she stopped blaming me, and that was enough. There were moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. Not because I was losing, but because the truth was heavier than lies. I felt tired, not angry. Standing firm required more strength than reacting ever would have. I never celebrated the shift in opinion. This wasn't a victory I enjoyed. It was simply reality catching up. I didn't want Ethan punished by humiliation. I just refused to carry blame that wasn't mine anymore. When people looked at me differently, I noticed it. Not with pride, but with relief. I was no longer the quiet wife who failed to hold her marriage together. I was someone who told the truth and stood by it. By the time the process moved forward, there was no confusion left to hide behind. Ethan's story had collapsed under its own weight. And I stood there, steady and composed, no longer willing to be reshaped into a role that was never mine. As time passed, the reality of Ethan's choices began to settle in. The confidence he once carried was gone. Conversations around him felt strained. Doors that used to open easily no longer did. People didn't look at him the same way. Respect isn't something you can demand back once it's lost. The life he thought was secure started to feel unstable. Plans he spoke about with certainty were suddenly uncertain. His sense of control slipped, replaced by frustration and regret he tried to hide. He blamed circumstances, timing, and pressure, but none of that changed the outcome. Lauren slowly disappeared from the picture. The connection that once seemed exciting couldn't survive consequences. What was hidden and thrilling lost its appeal when it required accountability. There were no grand endings, just distance and silence. Whatever they thought they had wasn't strong enough to stand on its own. I watched these changes from a distance. Not with satisfaction, but with understanding. Betrayal always comes with a cost. It just doesn't show up right away. I had my own pain to face. Some mornings were harder than others. There were moments of grief for the life I believed in and the future I imagined. That pain was real, and I didn't rush it. But it was honest pain. It didn't come with confusion or doubt. I began to feel lighter as time passed. Not because everything was easy, but because I was no longer fighting myself. I stopped questioning my decisions. I stopped wondering if I should have tried harder. I had already tried enough. Choosing myself wasn't dramatic. It happened in small ways. Setting boundaries. Making plans without fear. Speaking clearly without apology. Each choice rebuilt something inside me that had been worn down slowly over time. I didn't feel the need to explain my strength to anyone. I didn't seek approval. The peace I felt was private and earned. While Ethan struggled with the results of his actions, I focused on healing. I learned that loss doesn't always mean failure. Sometimes it means release. I didn't come out untouched. But I came out honest, whole, and free to move forward without carrying someone else's guilt. That was the real difference. And for the first time in a long while, the future felt like something I could shape on my own. The day the divorce was finalized felt quieter than I expected. No one cheered. No one made a scene. The papers were signed, the legal ties broken, and the weight I had carried for months finally lifted. There was a strange sense of calm, a clarity I hadn't known I could feel after so much chaos. I started to rebuild slowly. Not in a rush, not with anyone watching. I focused on small, meaningful changes, organizing my space, making plans I had postponed, and taking time to care for myself in ways I had forgotten. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady and intentional. Every choice reminded me that my life was mine to shape. I didn't seek revenge, and I didn't need it. Revenge is loud, thriving is quiet but stronger. Every day I spent focusing on myself, learning again who I was outside of the marriage, became a form of power Ethan could never touch. I didn't have to humiliate him back. The fact that I was moving forward without him was enough. Friends and family noticed the change. Not because I announced it, but because it was visible in my confidence and in the way I carried myself. I spoke less, but when I did, it held weight. I no longer reacted out of fear or hurt. I acted from understanding and strength. Sometimes I remembered that moment at the gala, the kiss in front of me. I used to imagine it as humiliation, a public display meant to break me. But now, it was different. That moment had marked a beginning, not an ending. The person I had become after that night was stronger, calmer, and more focused. I smiled because I had already taken control of my life and my mind, long before anyone else realized it. I began pursuing dreams and goals I had put aside for others. The hobbies I abandoned, the trips I never took, the career moves I delayed, all became part of my life again. Each step forward was a reminder that the life I wanted didn't require approval or forgiveness from anyone. The past, with all its betrayal and hurt, no longer had power over me. I remembered the pain, yes, but it was clean now. Pain that teaches, not binds. I could think of Ethan and Lauren without burning anger. I could reflect without regret. Walking away didn't feel empty. It felt like finally breathing freely after holding my breath for too long. I wasn't defined by what he did or by how he tried to humiliate me. I was defined by the choices I made, the life I built, and the strength I carried quietly, day by day. And as I looked forward, the future felt wide open. It belonged entirely to me. I didn't need to look back. I didn't need revenge. I had my life, my clarity, and my peace, and that was the power he could never take.